one on Syria. Sorry. Based on what the Secretary just said now, is it, he seemed to say, well, he didn't seem to say, he did say, that if and when you get this week-long reduction in violence and the JIC takes effect, that the United States and Russia could agree on places where Assad's Air Force could bomb or go after Nusra. That's what he said. He said he is allowed and will be able outside of that area if the JIC gets set up to target Nusra. But that will be on strikes that are agreed upon with Russia and the United States in order to go after them.
Yes.
Are you comfortable with that? I thought the whole idea was to ground the Air Force completely.
No, Matt, the idea was not to...
And that the only people who would be flying combat operations after the JIC got set up would be the U.S. and Russia, except for in the areas where ISIS is.
No, actually that was not the understanding and was not part of the discussions throughout the process. The idea was not to, quote-unquote, ground Assad's Air Force everywhere all the time. The objective was to limit their combat operations in such a way that they could not hit opposition targets or civilian targets, but that if they were able, willing, intending to target Nusra, which is outside the cessation of hostilities, that would still be permissible. But the whole purpose for the JIC is to allow for a measure of compliance and monitoring and pre-coordination of strikes that they would do against Nusra, so that it's not done without visibility of both Russian and U.S. planners.
Yeah, but 2.5 weeks ago in Geneva, before the meetings in China, the idea, at least I thought it was the idea, and maybe I got this wrong, but it was that with the exception of ISIS, Assad's forces wouldn't be allowed to go after anybody, and that the only people who would go after Nusra in the safe zone, for lack of a better word, would be the U.S. and Russia. That's clearly wrong, right?
Well, I think you were incorrect in surmising that. I think
or someone was incorrect in telling us, not just me, that, correct? Or it changed. I don't know. Maybe something changed between the...
I don't believe there's been any change to that. I mean, the understanding, well, as we worked through this now for many weeks, the understanding was that that's why we wanted maps of designated areas, areas where we knew Nusra was predominant, areas where we know the opposition is predominant, and areas where they're marbled and mixed. And inside those three types of areas, Assad would not, he wouldn't go after opposition, and he wouldn't go after areas where it's mixed, because he's not capable of discrete, discriminate targeting. But as the Secretary said, in accordance with the JIC and the work of U.S. and Russian planners, we're not ruling out that Assad would be able to strike at Nusra. Again, Nusra is a UN-designated foreign terrorist organization. They are not party to the cessation. So there's really no grounds and frankly little purpose in trying to completely limit and restrict the Assad regime from hitting Nusra. The idea, though, is that if and when they did, there would be visibility, there would be transparency over that inside the joint implementation.
You guys already say that he's not actually targeting
Well,
Nusra.
Exactly. I mean,
well, what happens if the Russians come to you and say, okay, here's a target that we want to hit, and the Syrians want to hit it, and you guys say, well, no, it's mixed. Is it a 2-to-1 vote, or you guys have? Well, you can say no.
That was the purpose for poring over the maps
so
and the technicalities of those areas. Absolutely.
Okay, how exactly?
Well, look, I'm not going to go through chapter and verse of the way the JIC is going to operate. One thing, because their teams are discussing, as the Secretary said right now in Geneva, to set up the kinds of processes and procedures that the JIC would use.
You have no recourse, though. If they could bomb an area that they say is Nusra, and you guys say is marbleized, And there's zero consequence.
No, I didn't say that at all, Matt.
No, I know you didn't say that, but that's what the effect is.
No, it's not. It's not. Look, again, I don't want to get too much in the details here of procedure because, again, those procedures are being worked out. But the whole idea of having designated areas and sharing information, targeting information in those areas where there's marbleized and areas where there's opposition, is to do exactly that, to limit, to restrict, to stop Assad from being able to go after opposition groups where they are.
Yeah, but my understanding of the entire thing was that you were going to ground Assad's air force in areas that in these so-called permissive, safe, no-fly zones. And that's clearly not what's happening here, because they are still going to be allowed to attack in areas that are that may be opposition held, but with marbleized components.
No.
They won't?
It's not quite that simple. They will be permitted if there is a consensus here inside the JIC that to hit a designated, a known Nusra target. There's no prohibition under this arrangement for them to do that, but it will be with the visibility of both the United States and Russia beforehand. But wait a minute now. But on areas where they're mixed and marbleized, where we know there is opposition nearby or intermingled with, they won't be allowed to do that. That's the whole reason why we've got these designated areas where we know Nusra is dominant, where we know the opposition is dominant, and where it's mixed. The whole idea for having a discussion with the Russians about this, such as we have to this point, and will continue to have if the JIC gets set up, is to provide a level of certainty and visibility on where Assad would be able to fly. But there was never a point at which we said, at least I can't remember a time where we said that they were going to be grounded permanently forever and not allowed to fly. It's about flying combat missions against opposition and civilians that we want to restrict.
It was never that they were going to be entirely grounded. It was, though,
right.
After the Geneva meeting 3 weeks ago, unless I was misinformed, and that's possible, that they would only be allowed to fly combat missions against ISIS, and that areas where and areas that are outside and against Nusra and ISIS outside of these safe zones. But inside the safe zone, the understanding was that they wouldn't be able to fly at all. That the only people who would be able to strike at Nusra targets in the safe zone would be the U.S. and Russia.
You keep talking about safe zones, and maybe that's where we're getting hung up. I don't know what you mean by safe zone.
The area where it's held by the opposition, which
or
you say
marbled,
includes marbleized.
Which would,
right.
Yes, they would not, that's right. That is correct. They would not be able to strike in areas where we know the opposition is dominant or opposition controlled, or where there is the marbling, the intermingling, the mixing, because they're not capable of being discrete and discriminate about that. That's
different than what you said before, because what the Secretary seemed to say was that inside the safe zone, is that the right term?
No, it's not.
Okay, what's the right term?
There's your pre-designated areas.
The pre-designated areas. Okay. Inside the pre-designated areas, is the Syrian Air Force allowed to target what Nusra?
In those areas that we know are Nusra dominant and where there's no opposition present, then yes. But it'll be on a case-by-case basis.
But then they're not in the pre-designated area. Those people are not. Then
there are three types of pre-designated areas.
Yeah.
The whole reason that we've had
opposition, marbleized,
and Nusra. In the areas where we know Nusra is dominant, since Nusra is a foreign terrorist organization, since they're not party to the cessation of hostilities, they'll be able to target Nusra. But it won't be without. It won't be unilaterally without the visibility of the joint implementation zone.
But you have visibility now, or at least you say you do, because you claim that they're not that they're hitting the opposition, the moderate opposition, when they claim they're hitting Nusra.
Exactly.
That visibility exists now. I just don't I'm not sure that I understand what the point of this whole thing is. They can't because they can still fly and attack areas where that are in dispute.
But the reason,
and there's without any punishment.
But right now, Matt, they're doing it. They're claiming they're going after Nusra, and they're really not. Okay, by and large, and you know this, the bulk of their military activity, whether it's on the ground or in the air, has been against opposition and it's been against civilians. And on the rare occasion when they have hit a Nusra target, because they have been coming under attack by Nusra, so I'm not saying they're not hitting them at all. On the occasions when they have, they've been doing it unilaterally, or with the sometimes the support of the Russian military, and there's been certainly no visibility on our side in terms of how they're doing it, when they're doing it, or how accurately they're doing it. So what the JIC will allow us to do, again, if it gets set up, and I'm not saying it will, there's two purposes here, and I think one is the coordination and sharing of information, but the second thing is compliance and enforcement of the cessation of hostilities. So if we get a JIC, it will give us, certainly the United States, much more visibility than we have right now into where those Nusra targets are and what Assad is going to be allowed to do to
How
target
does it
them.
give you guys more visibility into
Because
what the
because the Russians have influence over the regime, and the Russians will be able to share information with us inside the JIC.
But you know where they are already, don't you? Or at least you say you do.
Which is why we had a discussion
Well,
about
if and when
designated
we
areas.
get to next Monday and the JIC gets set up, I guess we can revisit this because
I would
now I'm
be happy-
completely confused. I have no idea, actually, but anyway.
Just to clarify,